On this episode of Purposely Curious, we discuss one of the film industry's most notable actress and film producer, Hedy Lamarr. But it's not her film career that we discuss, but her life as a young Jewish Austrian woman who became an inventor. Join us as we look into this amazing woman's scientific career outside of her Hollywood career, which is what everyone remembers her for. So, get nice and cozy as this episode starts now. Hello, Leonie.
Aloha, Mary. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Aloha. Yay, I like it.
Yeah, we got to switch it up, remember?
Yeah, we're switching it up now. So listener, I know you're listening. He said aloha.
Yeah, because I don't want to trigger any kind of violence or anything, you know?
Oh, stop it.
I don't want any more death mail, hate mail, or anything.
So it's so funny because I forwarded Leonie a message from, I think it was a message I got like at, was it like midnight or 1 a.m? Someone was listening to it and they were like, I love greetings, Mary. Like, so it's a debate going on.
That is funny.
Yes. So how have you been, Leonie?
Good. I've been good. Been busy. With stupid projects and stuff and whatever. And
stupid. Please. I see you guys had Kat Von D recently on your show.
Yes. Yeah. That was a lot of fun. I knew her from, well, okay, when I say knew her, no, we crossed paths, you know, back in the day when I worked in radio because, you know, she was a hot thing on TV. She had Miami Ink and then LA Ink and, you know, she was like the who's who in tattoo, you know, like she tattoos, you know, Lady Gaga, Dave Grohl, like Dave Navarro, you know, all these big name people, you know, and it's not because she's just famous. It's because she's really talented. It's something that she started doing when she was 14, you know, so back in the day, she was different back then because she was running, you know, in the same circle as my friends and they were a little crazy. So a lot of not so good things were going on, you know, but she changed her life, you know, she's now married, happily married with a kid and her husband. And she just launched her music career and her new CD, her new album is really good. It's really good.
So it's crazy because my friend worked with her on one track. But the reason I was going to tell you is because you've had two. Growing up, I really, you know, I'm like a hip hop. I'm born and raised in LA, right?
Yes.
Love hip hop, but love rock. Like I remember I told you guys had Dita Von Teese, and I was like, oh my god, because I'm like so into like 50s, 40s, even 30s and 20s fashion, right?
Yeah.
But I've always been into that pinup thing, and I also really liked Kat Von D. I know that she can be controversial.
Yes.
But I used to really look up to her as well. And she had done, I don't know if it was for LA Ink. When she was launching LA Ink, she had these pinup shots done.
Right.
I don't know if you remember them. And they had, it wasn't her, obviously, because she was wearing like pinup clothes.
Right.
And the backgrounds were like bright pink. You know, and the point is that when I first did my first pinup shots, I must have been like 26, with the photographer Roy Varga. And one of the, when I take pinup shots, they're like different sets for different like outfits kind of. But one of them, I was so excited. It was like a bright pink background. And I was like, oh my God, like a little girl, you know, like I love these. These are like Kat Von D's like LA Ink promo shots. Like I was so excited. Anyways, but yeah, I was really nice. Those are the two people that I've been really excited that you've had on your show. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. She was I mean, she was a lot of fun, and it's such a, you know, it's still not, I don't know, it's still not easy for me to go out into a crowded space, but she just had her dress rehearsal show. She invited us to, you know, and I didn't realize it was going to be such a small audience, like just her friends and family, you know? And I'm so bummed that I did not go because I thought, you know, it was going to be a packed house. And I'm like, I don't want to be amongst that many people in a crowd, you know? And then she also invited us to her house. So I look forward to checking out her awesome Victorian house that she has here in LA. Oh my
God. Seriously, like her pool is like, the cement is like red.
Yep.
So, oh my God, it looks like you're swimming in blood. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, she owns two castles in Europe,
Yeah.
She has
Yeah.
I can't remember if it's Ireland or Spain. And then I think she has, she just bought that 25-room estate in Indiana that, I don't know if it was a plantation or something, but it's historical. And she just wants a place to get away, from LA, So I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's definitely somebody who's pretty amazing. I, totally admire her for, turning her life around, going straight. And she's a successful businesswoman. Like, she's kicking ass in everything she does. And I'm like, dude, that's amazing,
Yeah.
So it was fun.
Perseverance.
It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
But I did want to get into this week's subject. I don't know why I got all tongue-tied with the subject. Have you heard of Miss Hedy Lamarr?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah, you know what? She was, I'm going to tell you a couple of things. In my past life, 2 lives ago, she was my pinup girl. Like back in the 30s and 40s, she's the girl hat on the wall, She's like, because man, she was beautiful, And of course, not just talented on the screen, but did some pretty amazing things behind the scene. And secondly, this is how you and I met, by the way.
What?
Ooh, crickets, silence.
Oh my God, what did I miss?
Because
keep in mind, I also have a bad memory. I'm known for having the mind of a goldfish.
Goldfish.
Yes.
Remember, be like a goldfish, Mary.
Yes, Ted Lasso there for you guys.
Yes. You had posted something about her. I think you read a book about her or something.
Yes.
And then I said,
the only woman in the room.
Yes. And then that's when I told you, I'm like, hey, I know of her and these great things that she did because it popped up in my physics class at Caltech, and professor brought it up and we had multiple discussions about, and all that. And then we went back and forth. You and I were talking about that. And then that's how we started talking, like, and then next thing you know, we became friends, but yeah, it's so funny that you
Nerds unite. Yeah.
Nerds unite.
I love it. Totally. Yeah. So Miss Hedy Lamarr was born on November 9th, 1914 in Vienna, Austria. She, though, was known as an Austrian-born American actress who was idolized in the American film industry. That's literally what she's known for, right? She, at her time, was considered the most beautiful woman. And she was so beautiful to a lot of people. She was like the muse. And so guess what I found out when doing research on this was that she was the inspiration for Disney's Snow White and also the inspiration for DC's Catwoman. To me, the best inspiration, I think, for these caricatures, in my opinion. Now, if you don't know who Hedy Lamarr is, and you guys, we all remember the caricature of Snow White, right? Google her right now, Hedy Lamarr, and you will be like, okay, I see it. I see that Snow White looks like her. So it's very interesting that she was the inspiration for these two caricatures, which was DC's Catwoman and Snow White's, Disney's Snow White.
It's amazing. I honestly did not know that. Like I knew.
Yeah.
That.
So Google her, guys, right now on your phones, wherever you're at. Well, if you're driving, don't.
Right.
Are you driving? Put that phone down.
Hey Siri.
Do not. Yeah.
Did I activate your phone's Hey Siri?
But yeah, so I was like, wow, this is crazy. Have you seen now that you know Hedy Lamarr, you obviously had known of her. Now that you know the Snow White and you think of Snow White, do you see the resemblance?
Oh, totally, yeah.
100%, right? Yeah,
she has this angelic face, but at the same time, it's sexy. It's like, it's purity and it's sexy at the same time. It's just that fine line of beauty that it's a very unique face. It's a Hollywood face. It's a golden, the golden era of Hollywood. That's who she, that's her face is.
Okay. Are you talking about Hedy Lamarr or Snow
White?
Hedy. Okay. I was thinking you were talking about Snow White, and I was like, I don't know, like,
no.
Yeah, sorry. But Disney stuff was a little kinky back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't put it past them.
Right.
So the reason I started looking into Hedy Lamarr was a book that you mentioned, right? That I had added to my TBR list, which is The Only Woman in the Room by Marie Benedict. I don't know how I knew of Hedy Lamarr as one of the, like we think of Marilyn Monroe, she's one of like the top 5 women actresses that we think of celebrities of that time.
Right.
But I honestly didn't know anything else, right? So here comes this book, The Only Woman in the Room, right, by Marie Benedict.
Yeah.
And, basically from what I was reading from people who had read it, without them giving me spoilers, it was like there was more to her than we know, than what we know, as far as like she was a Hollywood starlet. She was the most beautiful woman in the world. And so I started digging. Obviously, you guys who have listened, I've probably mentioned, I love historical fiction books. Historical fiction books basically tie in a lot of historical data with a lot of like fictional characters, right? But the more I read into it, I was like, wow, I really did this happen? And I started Googling stuff, and then I was like, oh yes, okay. And I was like, wow, I didn't know this about her. And then I went on YouTube, right, and I just started like going crazy.
Right.
But the book basically discusses her life in Vienna before what we all know as her life of Hedy Lamarr. And so she was born Hedwig Eva Keisler, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yes.
To a wealthy Jewish family in 1914. So you can see where that would be an issue, right, for her, Miss
of course.
Hedwig Keisler, in the future, because hint, hint, World War II, right?
Right.
Her father, when she was a child, would spend a lot of time with her, kind of showing her the inner works of how machines worked. She would be interested in how he would build things and, like stuff like that. And then her mom was a pianist, and so she would show her the art side of stuff. And so as a young age, Hedwig was I guess built to be a curious mind, right?
Yeah.
So while most little girls were being kind of trained to be good housewives at a young age, her parents were teaching her things that kids, back then people were like, oh no, you're supposed to be in the kitchen. And again, she was born in 1914.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so her parents took a different approach. And so that's why I guess she had such a strong personality.
Right.
And so while, anyways, now she's kind of growing up and becoming kind of like a teenage girl. And again, she was very beautiful for her time, right?
Yeah.
She was beautiful, period.
Right.
But back then it was like something about her just stood out. And so again, now she's turning into a young woman. She's still a teenager, underage. But back then, men would be like, oh, I'm going to start suiting this family so that I can marry their daughter, right? She started to turn a lot of like heads. And so men started to kind of, try to talk to her, right?
Right.
She had started taking acting classes because her mom was a pianist. And so she started to feel like, oh, I want to be in the arts, but at the same time, she was still a nerd on the side, right?
Yeah.
But she started taking acting classes, and she had been in a few small films where she was seen by Max Reinhardt, who was an Austrian-born theater and film director. And he kind of said, oh, I really want you to be in some of my films and do some theater for me, right?
Right.
So I do not know if you have heard of, okay, so she made a few movies, very not famous.
Right.
She was in a few, maybe not the main character, but then at the age of 18, she made what could possibly be a historical film. Have you heard of this film?
I'm trying to think. 18. Was it a Cecil B. DeMille movie?
No.
I'm not sure.
Well, I know the name of the movie. I'm sorry, but I don't know.
I mean, it wasn't Samson and Delilah, was it?
No.
Okay. That's one of the 2 or 3 movies that I've only seen of her.
Yeah, so she was 18. So she wasn't Hedy Lamarr yet. She was Hedwig Keisler at this time.
Okay.
She made the movie Ecstasy, where she plays a young wife who's not happy in her marriage to an older man. And in the scene, it sounds like she's depicting the first female orgasm.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
That's something you can never film or show in a movie or TV. And that's right. I remember it was controversial because she was acting
now
like
this was 1933.
Right.
Yeah, 1933. Right. So you know how sometimes people find that offensive now?
Right.
Offensive 20 years ago? This is 1933.
100 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, she was the first woman to portray a female orgasm or you know, on film.
Right.
That put Hedwig on an international map, you know, as far as like the film industry was concerned. And she did win some awards.
Right.
But she was also banned in conservative United States, Nazi Germany, and other countries. Right. So she was a celebrity, basically. Right. 18 years old, basically was a celebrity.
Yep.
So from this, she was getting more roles. And shortly after that, she starred in a play that was called Sissy, which is where her soon-to-be husband laid eyes on her. Have you heard of her first marriage?
No. Who did she marry? Who was her first husband?
Yes. So the reason I'm bringing this up, guys, and you're wondering where I'm going with this, is because in the book, it kind of goes... Her invention stems from this marriage. And I've kind of told you guys how her and her dad would show her the mechanics of how things are built, right?
Right.
And how she was a curious mind. And then now she took on a row of the female orgasm, the first one in 1933. Right. You know what I mean? Like she was already very liberal, right? So Mr. Frederick Mandel was a prominent fascist and had ties to Mussolini in Italy. He was half Jewish and half Catholic, which is important, right? Okay. Now remember, Miss Hedy Lamarr, who is at this time Hedwig Keisler, is full Jewish, right? They started dating, I guess. And so when she said she wanted to marry him and he started kind of courting the parents, they were kind of, I guess, privately were upset about this because they saw that his ties with Mussolini, and also, you know, they were like, he's fascist, he's sympathetic to them. His family owned an ammunition and weaponry. They would make manufacturing company. Right. So he would have contracts with like Mussolini and later had contracts with Nazi Germany. Now, Hedy's parents disapproved this privately, but they also understood because of the changing scope of Nazi Germany, of the rise of fascism. Because remember, in Spain, they had a dictator. Mussolini was a dictator, right? Yeah. So they understood that this may maybe benefit them in the long run. So Mandel, being half Jewish and half Catholic, was now, I guess, probably with his dealings with the fascist regimes, said, if we get married, you have to convert to Catholicism, which Hedy did, right? And it's basically, she believes, and everyone kind of accepts, is to hide that she was Jewish. Right. Now keep in mind, she's a beautiful woman, right? So he thought maybe we can get away with it, but remember, he was also half Jewish, but now they're playing the role of Catholics, right? Right. With a manufacturing company. But when they got married, she basically became his trophy wife. And so, you know, she was kind of there when they would bring in they would have like dinner hosts. You know, like when you watch like movies from back then, they would all come dressed in the most beautiful outfits to have a nice dinner. So she would then have to like be in those dinner parties. And so he was very authoritative in their marriage. And so she quickly realized that she could never be an actress like the person she was before. She had to stop. Like she just had to do whatever it was that he was, which was like be the trophy wife. And it's said that at one point, going back to the movie Ecstasy, he had his people buy like all the copies of the movie and like burn them because he wanted to kind of like rid that memory of who his wife was.
Right.
So apparently he was abusive as well. But I don't want to go too much into it. But apparently in these parties, Hedy also said in her memoir that Mussolini and Adolf were once in attendance. So just to show you how deep he was getting into.
That's crazy.
Now, this is before the war full-fledged war started, right?
Right.
So Mando was probably thinking, I'm giving them ammunition. I should be on their good side. But again, he's coming off as Catholic, right?
Right.
So her realizing she definitely could never be who she wanted to. And as things started getting worse and worse and worse, and her, people talk, right? Oh, it sounds like they're getting, they're attacking Jewish people. There are a lot of anti-Semitics. I'm sure they had these conversations. And so she started to realize not only is he abusive, I'm his trophy wife, I'm not who I am. My life and my family's life is in danger, right?
Right.
So what she did was she dressed in a lot of jewelry one night and dressed as a maid, fled to Paris as a maid, and then from Paris went to London. Did you know any of this?
No, I didn't.
I know. Isn't that crazy? All I knew, most of us know is that she was a Hollywood actress.
Right, right. I mean, it's a crazy story, but you know what? If she had not, even though this guy was not a good guy and he was controlling and all that, and abusive, if she did not marry this guy, then she would have probably been dead.
Yes.
Or killed because she escaped Nazi Germany, basically,
Exactly. So going back, she fled because she saw shit's gonna go down, right?
Yeah.
She fled. Not only was she fleeing an abusive relationship, she saw that shit's gonna hit the fan, right?
Right.
She fled, and while he has no idea where his wife is, time progressed, right? I'm not gonna go into her acting very much in this episode.
Right.
But time passed. She did do some jobs here and there. He has no idea where they are. In the meantime, Germany took over Austria, which is how the war kind of essentially started. And her husband, was in the end partially Jewish.
Right.
That came to it. So he was made to sell a lot of his business and everything to, they made Jewish people sell their stuff before they took everything away from them. They were like, we're giving you a chance to sell your businesses. We're giving you a chance to sell everything you own.
Right.
And so he tried to put a lot of his stuff in Swiss banks, which is what we hear all the time. Now it's Swiss and Costa Rica now in modern times. Right. But he tried to do that, eventually was forced to give up everything. And he then sought refuge in Brazil, then ended up in Argentina, where we all know now a lot of Nazis and Italian fascist Mussolini followers ended up in after World War II.
Yep.
But I'm getting sidetracked, right? So back to the main character, Miss Hedwig Keisler, aka Hedy Lamarr. She is now a free woman, right? In a country that isn't her home, which is England.
Right.
But she's like, I'm free, the war is starting to kick in. And so because of all of this, I told you guys, right? So now we know the Nazis' agenda, right? The Nazis are against everything that she is, and that is Jewish, right?
Yeah.
So even though she's trying to pay bills and, she's still acting, she's like, how the fuck can I help? Because her dad raised her to like, think and, like she's like, I need to help. Like, how can I help? Right.
Right.
Are you into this? I mean, I'm so passionate right now.
It's great. This is great.
Yes.
No, there's so much I didn't know. And I'm just like, my mouth is like open. I'm like, wow, I can't believe all this,
Yeah. So while she was working, kind of like she did some stuff in England and other places in Europe, the war started to progress and it just really got bad. So she ended up in the States, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where she changed her name, and she was still you know, she still was building her career, coming out in movies, and people were like, wow, she's a beautiful woman. She's getting roles. She's doing it, but she can't stop thinking of her homeland that was being occupied by Nazis, and how the Nazism is getting worse. And, you know, her people, who she is at the core, right, are being killed, or those are the rumors, right?
Right.
So she wanted to help out. And so she's like, what can I do? Like, what can I do to help? So what do you think she did?
At this part of her life, I don't know. I mean, I imagine she moved to Hollywood.
Yes. Well, she's already in Hollywood.
She's Hollywood.
And again, she changed her name to Hedy Lamarr.
Right.
Because at this point, she's like afraid of, you know, anti-Semitism anywhere. Right.
Right.
So she has a new name. But she was thinking, like, how can I help? Like, what can I do? And so she was always listening to news that was coming from the war, right? And so one of the things was that she had learned that torpedoes in general were radio controlled, right? So torpedoes are what submarines would shoot, right? To hit either another submarine or the enemy's like boats, right?
Right.
Or ships. Which radio technology back then was still primitive, right?
Right.
So what happened was so let's say you had Leone's ships. Leone's ships are against my ships, right? So Leone would figure out a way to make sure that he would block my radio frequencies so the torpedoes wouldn't attack what I was trying to shoot at, because Leone was able to jam the radio frequency.
Right.
And so she was like, how can I figure out a way so that they cannot jam, you know, the allies, you know, frequencies?
Right.
And think about it. Who's thinking this? I would have never thought of that. But this is a person who was really, really smart, self-educated by her family, you know, who had a curious mind, right? So she started creating a device that, or kind of like the concept of this device that would stop ships from jamming torpedo signals. And what it was is that she had figured out a way, or in her mind, right, in her, you know how we did the episode of Tesla?
Right.
She said, you know, if we can find a way to get the radio frequency and the signal of the torpedoes to kind of jump and change radio frequencies, it'll be harder to like jam it, because when the Nazis or the Italians are trying to like jam that radio frequency, the order is already on the next frequency.
Right.
And so she got her friend, who was a pianist, George Antheil, said, I need you to help me create this. Right.
Right.
So he basically helped her build it. And so basically what she invented was this radio guidance transmitter, and she made it to where the radio transmitter and the torpedo's receiver signals would jump simultaneously from radio frequency to radio frequency, making it literally impossible to locate by the enemies.
Right.
And so they couldn't block the messages. And so this is, again, like technology back then that no one had ever heard of. And that to me is amazing, right? Like, who would come up with that? And let alone a Hollywood actress. At this point, she's like huge in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, this is the part of her story that is very, very fascinating to me, because she had a predisposition to science, and yet she never studied science.
No degrees, none of that.
Nothing. She just had like this curiosity. Like, to be a scientist, you have to be curious. That's one of the, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't be lazy. You have to be curious. That's just it. You know, it doesn't matter what level of science. And she had that, which is amazing. And it ultimately, she starts dating billionaire Howard Hughes.
Yeah.
You know, who is famous for the Spruce Goose and, you know, all these inventions he made and you know.
Now, and famously, this is before she started dating him.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I find amazing. You know what I
Right.
mean? That this woman already had, like, she's like, how can we figure out a ways that Nazi ships cannot jam this? And
Right.
she came up with this, you know? And so
Right.
she's like, how do we get this on? That's when she got her friend to help her build it, right?
Yep.
So they were really ecstatic once they got it and they tried it and they saw that it may worked. And so they signed up for a patent with the U.S. on August 11th, 1942. So World War II was full on right now. And she filed it under her name, not Hedy Lamarr, but Hedwig Keisler Mandel, because she was still married legally.
Right.
She did it in 1942, even though in Hollywood she was already Hedy Lamarr, right?
Yeah.
They took it to the U.S. Navy. Guess what the U.S. Navy did?
They applied it.
No, they fucking did it. They said,
at first they did it.
well,
At first
no. So, yeah. So they did not. They
Right.
declined it. And so back then they said, sorry, we don't, you know how now they like contract with Boeing, Tesla, Northrop? Back then they did not take any kind of recommendations or anything from anybody outside.
Because it wasn't until after the war until they applied it.
Yeah,
the
so in
50s.
1942, the Navy basically said, sorry, we're not taking any advice from a piano player and a Hollywood actress. And it's kind of sad, right? Because this is literally, we're going to get into what it became, but she basically was giving them the footprint to maybe winning the war sooner than they did.
Right.
But they turned her down. So since they declined her, she was like, well, how else can I help in the war if they don't want to take this, right? You know, because again, remember guys, back now the U.S. government contracts out, you know, you have the geniuses like Elon Musk, right? They contract out to agencies like that to kind of figure out, and those engineers figure out the stuff. In conjunction with the military, but back then it was like frowned upon by the engineers. Like we don't get outside stuff, let alone Hollywood starlet, right?
Right.
So, long story short, they rejected it. So she was like, "Well, how else can I help in the war effort?" So what she did was she started to basically sell war bonds and using her celebrity to sell war bonds, and so. She basically sold about $25 million worth of war bonds in 10 days. That's equivalent to $350 million now.
That's amazing.
In 10 fucking days.
Yeah.
So she's like, okay, you don't want to take my patent, you know, with my technology, then I'm going to do this. And so, you know, she still felt like I did something to help, right? Going back to her rejected technology, now we're moving forward to the 1950s. Now, keep in mind, guys, she patented this August 11th, 1942. Right? She, in the 1950s, this is now post-World War II, the U.S. government started to now contract outside of the government, right? With companies who, you know, I don't think it was like Northrop or like, you know, Boeing back then, but they started to contract and they gave these companies Hedy Lamarr's workings that she submitted to them that they declined in 1942, right? So what they were looking for, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, is the sonobuoy. Please, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm sorry. And so that was where they could drop it into the ocean from a plane to help detect submarines. And they were using Hedy Lamarr's radio frequency jumping, right? As the basis for that. And the government, being the U.S. government, never said anything to Hedy. And she still owns a patent to this. Are you surprised?
No, not at all.
So they never told anyone this. And in the 50s, you know, she's still the celebrity now, right? Hedy Lamarr. And so the patent expired in 1959. And she didn't renew it after that. So the U.S. government technically owed her practically 6 years worth of money for using her patented work, but they kept it hush hush. Isn't that sad? Yes.
Yeah.
In 1962, for the Cuban Missile Crisis, all U.S. ships that were involved off the coast finally used Hedy Lamarr's, invention of her, her frequency hopping technology. And so it was kind of accepted as, oh shit, this works, right?
Yeah.
And it's sad because now we're in the 60s and her patent had already expired. They already cheated her from 6 years of financial gains, right? And she still has no idea that this is being used. She has no idea.
Right.
And that's kind of like where the sad part comes in, because she's a celebrity. She's maybe not acting as much, right? She's getting older. So people, now we're 2 decades and a half away from World War II, removed from World War II. So people are remembering, or they don't realize like what she lived through, if that makes sense. They knew her as the actress. They didn't realize who she was married to, right, who she was having dinner parties with, right? And she never talked about it. It was one of those things that she was Hedy Lamarr. She wasn't the, 100% Jewish girl that was born in Austria before the invasion, right?
Well, think about it. Think about the time. Think about the 1950s, being a woman in the 50s, being at a dinner party and saying like, oh, darling, I invented that technology. People look at you like, you're no way,
Yep.
Look
at Tesla. Yeah. Same thing.
But just look at it as the sexism, lens, for a second. When you think of the contributions of women in science and engineering back then, were because they were doing underground work. They were doing a lot of secret work in labs, and they were not allowed, to publish or go, public with their findings and all that, because it was a man's world, and that's the sad part and unfortunate. But lucky for her, when she was dating Howard Hughes, he put every scientist and engineer at her disposal. He said, hey, whatever she wants to do, like whatever she asks for, do it, which is amazing because
he saw her potential.
Yeah. And that's what blows my mind. And she did something really cool. She suggested to him, okay? She suggested to him that the designs of his airplanes are too square and boring looking, and they needed to be more streamlined and shaped like birds and fish. And that's ultimately, what led Howard Hughes to make these planes more round and more aerodynamic, so that they could fly better and all that. So her genius, carries over decades, not just from that patent, but and this is the mind-blowing part where she's with Howard Hughes. I mean, imagine if she was educated. Imagine if she had a degree in engineering
she'd
science.
Be unstoppable.
I think she would be Einstein. I think she would give us so many amazing things way back then, but did you ever see the movie The Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays Howard Hughes? No. Great movie, by the way. It's a great movie, great story about Howard Hughes. Now, in that movie are all the women he dated, right? Like Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, who else? Jean Harlow, who's played by Gwen Stefani. They all make appearances, right? All these, bombshells, all these actresses, hot, who's who, right? But the movie, they never showed Hedy Lamarr, and that's what really bummed me out, because she's a better story, than just like for example, there's a scene in the movie where Howard Hughes is interested in perfecting the women's bra, and he's like, yeah, we got to make the bra better for women, and it's just like, as funny as that was, like he really did do that, as funny as that was, like I would have rather seen a Hedy Lamarr character. I don't know who could have played her, but it would have been cool to see that and see her in the picture, who ultimately gave him advice to, for his planes and stuff. So but yeah, I recommend it. Check it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna add it to my list, because when I do that type of stuff, when I was in France and I went to Versailles, I came back and watched Marie Antoinette on HBO Max just because I'm that type of person. Right. But so now here we are, right? Her frequency hopping technology, right? 1933. No, wait, I'm sorry, I'm getting my years confused. 1942.
42, yeah.
She's pushing this onto the U.S. government. The U.S. government says, fuck no, you're an actress and you're a pianist. We only deal with the U.S. government staff, right? But they kept that shit. So it made sense to somebody, right?
Of course.
We're in the 60s. They use it. Now all the submarines have it, right? All the ships have it. And so a lot of this technology now, it's a big part of, and again, a lot of what Tesla did as well. We covered Tesla in a previous one of our first episodes. A lot of it goes into the technology we use now, which is GPS, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, which is basically her technology, which is frequency hopping technology.
Yes.
And so her inventions, you know, are estimated to be worth. Now, when we say estimated is if she remember we talked about she was never compensated for anything.
Right.
If she were to have been compensated, if she kept renewing that patent, the worth of her technology would have been $30 billion. $30 billion with a B.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy. Because frequency hopping is literally a component to a lot of wireless communication that we take for granted now. Of course.
We don't even think about it. We don't even have to know. All we have to know is like, oh, you got Bluetooth, you got Wi-Fi? Cool, thanks. We don't even care that it's in there, that it's working every second. Everything, like you and I talking right now, it's working, you know? Her patent, her invention, it's
We're working remotely.
Yeah,
I'm using Wi-Fi, you know? Are you?
Yeah. And you know, the amazing thing about this is in the early days of cell phones, now I did not have a cell phone. My first cell phone I got in 97, okay?
You don't have one now, or you didn't have one then?
I didn't have one then.
Oh, so, I'm sorry.
So in the early days of cell phones, when I, you know, right after high school, you know, like cell phones were out there, but they were expensive, right? There were car phones and, you know, the bills were $1,000 a month. They were really expensive, right? At that time, if you had a scanner, okay, you could buy a scanner off the shelf, you know, for $100, whatever, at the electronics store, you could listen to people's conversations on cell phones. Okay. Now, not till 1996, 97, my first cell phone was Sprint PCS phone. Now, Sprint does no longer exist because now they're owned by T-Mobile. And I hated that phone because I had no coverage anywhere, right? But that phone had spread spectrum technology. It was one of the first times that it hit the consumer market. So now it's not military technology. Now it's not secret. Now it's like, hey, it's in our phones, you know? So what was the big deal about that? Well, you couldn't listen to my conversation. You can't listen. You can't take a scanner and you can't listen. So it's doing the whole frequency hopping thing, you know?
Yeah. Who invented it? Miss Hedy Lamarr.
Yes. Yeah.
Or this young, beautiful Jewish girl, right? With Hedwig Keisler.
Yes.
It's amazing. I didn't know any of this until I started reading The Only Woman in the Room. Now, again, this doesn't go into her inventions, but more so, you know, the marrying, who she married, right, the Nazi Mussolini, and, you know, so I just started researching. I was like, wow, right, this is amazing. And sadly, guys, we are discussing, she had this patent, the U.S. government rejected, but they kept the paperwork, right?
Right.
She didn't renew it when it expired in 1959. And for 6 years before it expired, the U.S. government started using it with, you know, maybe not full on. It wasn't until the Cuban missiles dilemma that they really started using it, but they used it for the basis for other technology. And she had no idea because it was top secret. They cheated her out of fucking money and they cheated her out of recognition, right? This whole time the U.S. government's been using it. You know, now it's mainstream. We're in the 90s. You brought up, what year was it? 96, 97?
Yes.
She only got recognition until 1997. Now keep in mind she was born in 1914, was it?
Yeah.
Let me check my notes. 1914. Yeah. She only got recognition in 1997 when she was awarded with the Pioneer Award of Electronic Frontiers Foundation. In that same year, now 1997, I was already born. She only got recognition. We have cell phones, right?
Yeah.
And this is the beginning of, now at this point, the military has figured out the technologies, perfecting it, making it better. Cell phones are coming, right? So cell phones, you know, when we talk about like the police listening to our conversations, us listening to the radio,
right,
that's all her, right? And it wasn't until 1997 that she got recognition.
Yeah.
In that same year, a Canadian company called Willan, I hope I am pronouncing it correct, signed an agreement with Lamarr to acquire 49% of the manufacturing rights to her patent. And so she was paid for the remaining 51% in 10 installments. And that is literally the only compensation she ever got for her frequency hopping technology invention. Yeah. Remember I said this is worth about $30 billion if she had kept renewing the fucking patent.
Yeah, it's interesting because that was probably not her mindset, you know.
No. About the patent. Well, the thing is that the government did her wrong by keeping it secret.
Well, yes, and here's what you have to remember. Your only news in 1950s or before 1950s, 40s is newspapers or radio, right? Because TV was barely a thing.
Yeah, still I'm angry.
If nobody's writing about these patents in the paper, nobody's going to hear about it. Mm-hmm. So it's so easy to just use somebody's patent, not tell anybody about it, or, you know, and not pay them or whatever. And just, you know, because nobody's going to write about it. A newspaper writer for the New York Times does not understand the patent or how the technology works. Why would he or she write about it?
Patents were kind of written about in the 1800s because it was like kind of like the time of, you know, learning and inventions. And so, but then it kind of died out obviously with modernization. So Hedy Lamarr died in January of 2000 at the age of 85. 2000. She got literally died at 85, and only 3 years before did she get recognition.
Yeah.
How fucking sad is that?
Yeah.
Now there's more to her as far as she got older. There was a lot of issues. She was arrested, you know, a few times for shoplifting.
Yeah.
She was a hot mess, right? But just beyond that, right, where none of us are angels, right?
Right.
She was a great woman. And again, I'm talking about this invention. There were other things that she tried to invent that she was working on, but nobody knew this. Everyone thought of her as the Hollywood starlet, right? The woman who was the muse, the most beautiful woman in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Most people didn't realize what she went through in Austria, how she escaped her sympathetic fascist husband, right? Because he was trying to sell ammunition. Nobody knew any of this. And then her way to say, how can I help, is I'm going to invent this thing. I was mind-boggled. I was like, wow. So I had to do an episode, Purposely Curious, on the curious mind of Hedy Lamarr, and I have mad respect for her. There's a documentary. It was on Netflix, but it no longer is on Netflix, called Bombshell. And it's strictly on this, which is kind of showing how here's this beautiful bombshell, right? Who's a Hollywood goddess who everyone remembers as a Hollywood beauty, who was the inspiration for Snow White, you know, and Catwoman of DC. And no one had any idea that this woman was beyond ahead of her time, smart as fuck, you know. I had to do an episode because you also, so when I started reading The Only Woman in the Room by Mary Benedict, which I really enjoyed and what kind of got me into this, I read the book, it must have been like 2 years ago or more than 2 years ago. It was more than 2 years ago. And I just got obsessed with Hedy Lamarr, and now I'm adding her. You know how I tell you I love Dita Von Teese, and you know, she's on my list of women I admire. she's a badass bitch.
Yes.
You know, she was very ahead of her time, even when it comes to women's rights. She spoke her mind, didn't give a fuck, right?
Yeah.
But the point of it is that, you know, to go so long without any recognition. You know, everybody's on Tesla's nuts now, right? Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
And she still isn't getting the recognition she deserves, but she might soon, right? After I started getting obsessed with Hedy Lamarr and her history and everything, I had heard that Gal Gadot was doing, I thought it was a movie, but you told me it's an Apple miniseries.
Yes.
Yes. So you guys have that to look forward to, which I'm assuming will be in the coming years, but I'm assuming going to show kind of what we talked about, that, you know, her struggles, what she went through, and the badass woman that she was. Yeah. I sure hope so. At least.
I hope it's done right. I hope it tells a really good, complete story, much like what you read in her, you know, or her autobiography books, you know, or, you know.
She also has a memoir.
The Ecstasy.
Which with the other thing too is the memoir. You know how people are always questioning stuff. A lot of people question what she was writing. But I believe her. I'm sorry.
No, she was definitely, you know, a really fascinating woman, and you know, down to her last days of her life, kind of paralleled her early Hollywood career, which, you know, she wasn't like Jean Harlow or Katharine Hepburn. You know, those were starlets who people would be like, you know, hey, let me take a picture, let me get an autograph. You know, she was not about that. You know, like she would do it, but she would be confused, like, why do people want my autograph? You know, or why do they want to take my picture? You know, so it's interesting because that's the lifestyle of being an actor or an actress this day in Hollywood. Like, it comes with the territory. You have to be in front of the camera, or you have to interact with your fans at some point, you know, and she wasn't really about that. And then in her last days of her life, she was a recluse, you know, she, you know, distanced herself from the outside world, like not even her family, not even her kids, nothing. Like, she would not see anybody. It was mostly just phone conversations, and, you know.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when I discussed the fact that she only got recognition in 1997, she did not attend this award ceremony. One of her sons did.
Right.
So going back to being recluse, and a lot of it has been spoken, was that her livelihood, or what she was known for, was her beauty, right? She was the most beautiful woman of her time. And so they said, oh, and that's another thing. If you guys have gotten or had any plastic surgery, she would suggest to surgeons how they should cut to kind of give her facelifts.
Right.
And stuff like that. And it turns out that that's now what surgeons practice. So that's another thing that she is accredited for. Yeah. I didn't know any of this. So basically a lot of plastic surgery and where they do the cuts to do the facelifts and all this stuff is accredited to Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah.
Who is not a doctor.
Right. And you know what? She's not a chemist. And you know what else she had an early version of before everybody else?
Alka-Seltzer.
Yes. She went to that effervescence
and that was
tablet.
rejected as well.
Yeah. And she, you know,
I'm telling you guys, this woman is a genius. Was a genius.
Yeah. And I take that shit like once a week, you know, because it helps with my migraines when I get them, you know. And
yeah.
Again, you know, no formal training, no schooling, but imagine what she would have given us. Imagine what she would have given us if somebody said, hey, if some university said, hey, you know, either Cambridge or MIT or Caltech, and said, hey, come study with us, you know. Mind blowing. Like especially, you know, in the 50s when you had the Cold War, you know, where we're after the World War II, now we're in a Cold War with Russia, and it's a spy game, you know. Like, I'm surprised the US did not pick her up and be like, come to the secret labs at MIT or Caltech, like, come work with us, like, show us what can you do, you know, because imagine what she would give us.
That's the thing. There was still the patriarchy of the U.S. government, you know, and it's unfortunate because now we all know the U.S. government, you know, they do, you know, even in high schools, they'll do like, here's a contest, right? Like, they're willing to take anybody's ideas now. You know what I mean? But back then they did not. And also, you know, we lived in we still might for some people, but we lived where the patriarchy was like big. Misogyny was like a huge like thing, you know?
Right.
So, yeah. So, Hedy Lamarr.
And the cool thing is, you mentioned the documentary, The Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story, which came out in 2018, just a couple of years ago. It is free. You can stream it free on Canopy, Kanopy. It's the free streaming service. So it's on there right now. Otherwise,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, otherwise, if you don't catch it there, you could rent it for $3.99 on Apple TV or whatever. But
and
Canopy's
on
free.
YouTube. Yeah, because I was looking for it. So I was glad that I found it. Remember, so this book came out more than 2 years ago, right? The Only Woman in the Room. So I was able to catch it on Netflix for free.
Right.
But I noticed when I was researching for this episode that definitely, I think you can also rent it on YouTube. So you got to pay for it now, and it's not on Netflix, sadly.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode of Purposely Curious, and thank you, Leonie, for joining me again.
Always my pleasure, Mary. Mahalo.
Bye, everyone. That was episode 70 of the Purposely Curious podcast. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on most podcast platforms, and follow us on social media at Purposely Curious on Instagram and at Purposely C Pod on Twitter. That's Purposely, the letter C, Pod. Until next time, you know what to do.